This film is set in Spain. At the beginning of the movie, we will be introduced to the main character of this movie, named Rafa. By that time, Rafa was preparing to take part in a Superbike World Championship selection. Rafa is a widower with a son, and he is very ambitious to become Valentino Rossi's successor in the MotoGP Championship. The race started, and all the riders looked tense but excited. Each of them had one goal, to be at the top. Rafa was riding a Kawasaki Z10RR, which is known to have above-average capabilities. In the middle of the race, Rafa was able to overtake a few riders and was in first place, but as he entered the last 2 laps, his bike experienced engine problems. Rafa was disappointed, as it looked like his dream of becoming a superbike rider would be dashed, which meant he would have to wait another year to take part in the selection process. But surprisingly, Regina, a talent scout from the Honda team, reached out to him and invited him to join her team. He accepted the offer and said he would be there on time to take part in the selection. On his return from the circuit, Rafa was late to pick up his son, leaving his ex-wife, Natalia, upset. Rafa and Natalia had previously agreed that Matteo, their son, would spend the weekend playing with his father. They did this so that Matteo could grow well, both physically and mentally. Arriving at Rafa's home, one could see the various trophies that Rafa had won from motocross and supersport championships, and this proved that Rafa did have a talent when it came to riding motorcycles. Rafa shows his son a video of him on the racetrack. The next day, Rafa takes Matteo back to his mother. Rafa asks Natalia out for a walk to rekindle their long-stalled relationship. He hopes to reconcile, but Natalia firmly refuses it, arguing that all this time Rafa has only been prioritizing his motorbike rather than paying attention to his family. In the following days, Rafa showed up at Regina's invitation to take part in the selection process for the main rider of the Honda team, and he would be competing with 3 other riders who were quite young and seemed to have a lot of passion. Regina explains that the selection consists of 4 rounds and will be conducted regularly over the next few weeks. The first round of selection begins. Riding a Honda CBR 600RR, Rafa easily took first place, and it brought a smile to Regina's face, as she was sure her decision to bring Rafa on board was the right move. After the selection is over, Rafa hurries back to Natalia's house to tell her the good news, but to his surprise, Natalia's house is a mess, which leaves him in a panic. It is then revealed that Natalia works for a drug delivery service. Natalia works for a dealer named Carlos, but unfortunately, the 200,000 euros worth of drugs that she has to deliver are lost, who knows where, and it makes her confused. With no second thoughts, Rafa takes Natalia and Matteo into his home for the sake of their safety. After the incident that happened to Natalia, Rafa looked so puzzled. He feels sorry for Natalia, as she's also the mother of his son. Rafa then decided to meet Carlos. Rafa is ready to meet Carlos, starting with digging up information from his best friend, Cortez. After getting information from his friend, Rafa then heads to Carlos' base to negotiate regarding the problems his ex-wife is facing. Initially, Carlos refused to negotiate with Rafa. He said he didn't want to waste his time. At that point, Rafa decided to go home to figure out another way to pay off Natalia's debt. Arriving home, unexpectedly, one of Carlos' men calls him and asks him to come to a tattoo parlor on the outskirts of the city. Once he gets there, Carlos' henchman, Burro, tells him to get in the car and takes him somewhere. A while later, the car carrying Rafa arrives at a port in the city of Marseille to pick up a package of drugs. Apparently, Rafa is assigned to deliver the package to the tattoo parlor he visited earlier by riding a massive Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R. Rafa is required to fill up the gas tank at a designated location, and he also has to find the safest way to avoid the police. Without saying much, Rafa immediately speeds up on the motorcycle and carries out the orders given to him. On his way, Rafa encounters a problem. He is chased by the police, who are on patrol on the highway. It seems that the police take their duties seriously. To chase Rafa, they drove a Nissan GT-R A35. Thanks to his excellent racing skills, Rafa manages to trick these officers and arrive at the tattoo parlor on time. Who would have thought that the contents of the package Rafa was carrying were not drugs, but tapioca flowers? Carlos deliberately did this to test Rafa's abilities. Carlos later asks Rafa to be his courier for 2 months so he can pay off Natalia's debt. With no second thoughts, Rafa accepts the job. Carlos then hands him a cell phone, and Rafa must be ready whenever Carlos needs him. The next morning, Rafa goes to work as usual. As a consequence of his new job as a drug courier, Rafa struggles to divide his time properly between work, being a drug courier, and his racing hobby. The day of the second round of Honda team selection finally arrives, and on that day, it's unfortunate that Burrow is waiting for him at the selection site, as Rafa doesn't pick up his phone. Burrow then takes him to a tattoo parlor, the same place as before, and assigns Rafa to deliver the package that has been ordered. Again and again, Rafa gets interrupted by police officers as they receive a report that a very suspicious Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R was speeding down the street. Rafa was anxious as the distance between him and the police who were chasing him was getting closer. His heart was beating so fast, but he was lucky he was finally able to hide between the parked cars. He then quickly escaped through a shortcut that he managed to find. Rafa arrives at Carlos' residence and complains about the power of the Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R he rode. He asks Carlos to provide him with another motorcycle, a 1,000 cubic centimeters Kawasaki with racing tires, so that he can deliver the package faster. Returning from the drug dealer's place, Rafa comes back home and tells Natalia that the problems she has with Carlos have been resolved thanks to the help of his best friend, Cortez. Rafa deliberately hid his deal with Carlos because he didn't want to make Natalia worry. At his previous request, Rafa was given a Kawasaki ZH2 motorcycle known for its super torque and 1,000 cubic centimeters supercharged engine. The numerous activities he undertook left Rafa exhausted, and in the end, he relied on the drugs Burrow gave him. Rafa takes the drugs for the extra energy he needs to get through his 3 jobs, a factory worker, racer, and drug courier. As the days passed, the third round of selection for prospective racers was about to begin. Rafa looks very enthusiastic, despite being out of shape. While driving on the track, Rafa bumped into one of the racers, and that caused him to get into an argument with the racer. The racer thought that Rafa had intentionally harmed him, but Rafa firmly said that he had not cheated. Regina eventually managed to stop the argument between them. Later that evening, when Rafa comes home, he is surprised to find Natalia packing and intending to leave his house. Rafa begs her and Mateo not to leave him, and he hopes that Natalia will stay to work on their relationship. The following day, Rafa is once again assigned to deliver a package to a customer located in the middle of the city. To his surprise, Rafa found out that a big protest was taking place at that spot, and the police were standing guard everywhere to ensure the event. Carlos gets a crazy idea. He tells Rafa to go through the crowd by riding a motorcycle. Rafa has no other choice, like it or not, he has to deliver the buyer's order, and he boldly breaks through the rows of protesters and police officers riding on his motorbike. The police fire a bullet at him, and Rafa falls down, but luckily he is still in good condition. He then runs as fast as he can to save himself. Feeling threatened by the situation he is in, Rafa calls Burrow and asks him to pick him up because he believes the people who are chasing him are very dangerous. Rafa again runs as hard as he can to find Burrow's car. Thanks to their collaboration, Rafa is successfully rescued, and Burrow drives him away from that place. Having been upset about what happened to Rafa, Carlos blamed Burrow's cousin, Valder, for the incident. However, Burrow denies it, believing that his cousin would never dare to do such a thing. Natalia finally learned that Rafa became a drug courier in order to make up for all her debts. Natalia realized that all this time, Rafa had sacrificed a lot, and it made her heart melt. The two then decided to get back together. The next day, Rafa goes to the racetrack to take part in the last stage of the main rider selection for the Honda team. At the start of the race, Rafa dominates the race, but in the middle of the track, Rafa chooses the wrong lane because of his lack of focus. What Rafa did made Regina very, very disappointed. She had expected a lot from Rafa. To vent all his frustration over all his problems, Rafa is determined to complete his last task of delivering a drug package. Once he gets there, at an old building, Rafa meets Burrow, who is ready to receive the money from the client. When Rafa is about to leave, thinking he has finished his work, Burrow suddenly tells him to come back tomorrow morning to deliver another package. Rafa gets upset. He feels he is being taken advantage of. With the excuse of going to get his cell phone, Rafa walks towards Burrow angrily, takes his helmet, and then hits Burrow with it frantically. Afterward, Rafa calls Cortez and asks for his help in hiding Burrow's body. Rafa strikes a deal with Cortez. He will tell him the location of Carlos' drug warehouse so Cortez can take over Carlos' business. Cortez readily agreed to the deal, as he also hated Carlos. Meanwhile, with Burrow having gone missing, Carlos goes to Rafa's house to ask about Burrow's whereabouts. Rafa made up a story, saying that Burrow, a person Carlos trusted, had taken his money away with his cousin, Valder. Carlos believes Rafa's story, and he then takes Rafa to look for Burrow and Valder. While on their way, Carlos senses that someone is following him, so he decides to turn around and head to his warehouse to secure his drug packages. Upon arriving, Rafa sends his location to Cortez, asking him to come and get him. A while later, one of Carlos's men said that Rafa had lied. Burro and Valder were not the ones who had taken Carlos's money, as Valder was currently in prison. With that information, Carlos becomes furious because Rafa has lied to him. He plans to kill Rafa by shooting him. Rafa realizes he is in danger, and he attempts to escape. He speeds off on a motorcycle, and Carlos follows him with his car. Rafa crashes into a forklift, he falls and collapses helplessly. Carlos loads him into the trunk of his car and takes him to look for Burro and his missing money. Fortunately, Rafa can find his cell phone in his pocket, and he then asks Cortez for help. After receiving Rafa's message, Cortez moves to immediately stop Carlos and rescue Rafa. As Carlos drives out of the warehouse area, a large truck suddenly hits him. He is trapped and unable to get out of his car. A moment later, Cortez comes to Rafa's rescue. Cortez then shoots Carlos to death. At the end of the story, Rafa successfully solved all his problems and reunited with his wife and his son to live a better life. Regina then invites him back to join her team, as she feels Rafa is the right racer to join the Honda team. However, when Rafa was meeting Regina, there were suddenly two policemen who came and arrested Rafa. Regina is surprised by Rafa's arrest. Rafa is interrogated at the police station for his involvement with the drug cartel network, but instead of being thrown into prison, the police offer him a job. He will help the police dismantle the drug trafficking syndicate, and so without even a second thought, Rafa asks for a Kawasaki ZH2 motorcycle with racing tires to carry out his duties. The end.